2/20. And appreciate everyone who turned out tonight to hear Emily Filiberte telling us about the Golden Mean Warbler study. First, we have a little bit of official business with the LAS. First of all, it is up to our membership to vote and approve of the board of directors for the following year.
And the officers, I believe.
The officers in the board, yes. And Jan Seiler's been on the nominating committee.
Yeah.
So she's gonna read out.
I'm gonna read, you listen carefully.
And then we'll
bunch of voting. Okay, and I'd like to thank Janet Smith. She's here tonight. She was our part of our nominating committee, and Brad Zend is probably out there in Zoom land because he lives down in Madison. He doesn't drive up just for a week. They helped us round up people. And we were fortunate because our president, Karen, our vice president, Susan Schuler, and I, the treasurer, all agreed to serve another 2 years if at your pleasure, of course, if you vote us in. Otherwise, you can have the office yourself. And then we have nominations for the board. Many of them are agreed to continue. They're enjoying their service, so they've agreed to continue. They include Brad Baum. If you're here, wave your hand, just so some of them are undoubtedly online. Jenny Christopher, don't see her here. Ned Grossnickel, don't see him. Hi, Ned, I'm sure he's out there. Bob Lane, I did see Bob. There's Bob right there. John Munson, I don't believe is here tonight. Rob Pendergrass, he's agreed to serve as a new board member. We're very excited about that. And Willow Pingle, also a new board member. Is Willow here? I don't see her yet. Okay. And then we have Joe Schultz, who has agreed to continue on the board, even though he said, oh, please don't make me be secretary again. He served for 10 years as secretary. I think we should give him a hand for that. I would say, so we said, oh, it's all right, Joe, we'll figure out a way to cover it. So, and then Janet who just got back from visiting her new grandchild in Korea. Congratulations on that new grandchild, Janet. And Brad Zenda, who is online, he's down in Madison. No, Brad Baum, I may have said that about.
He lives up by Anago and he works for Reggie.
Oh, okay.
And we have a field trip to Reggie this Sunday.
Yeah.
If you want to join us, you can go to our website under events and field trips and register for the trip.
No, that would be
the Raptor Education Group.
Exciting trip, I'm sure. So those are our nominees. Now, are there nominations from the floor? We are happy to take nominations from the floor. And Susan said, yep, we'll take them. Whoever gets nominated, yep, we'll take them. Are there any nominations from the floor? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, then I think what we will do then is just vote for the whole roster of candidates. And can we just have one motion to approve all of them?
So
Okay, and second, do we have a second to that? Thank you, Janet. All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, step up and be the next officer. Okay, I don't hear any opposition, so thank you very much.
Thank you. The other thing we need to vote on, that is approval of revisions to our constitution and bylaws. It was my plan to show you a copy of it. But with all we went through, just to get to this point, we're not leaving. So do I have a motion to approve the 2023 version of the Alaska Constitution and Bylaws? Jan moves. Is there a second to that? And Graham, of course. Seconds. All that approve of the 2023 version of the Alaska Bylaws, Constitution Bylaws, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you so much for your approval, and thank you, Anne, for all the work you put into those revisions. She and Sue Hall had last done the revisions in 2006. It was time to review some of those things once again. Just a couple fast things. First of all, did you know that there are 8,760 hours in a year? We need one person to take 10 of those hours and volunteer to assist. We have assistant in the city of Stevens Point to help complete our application for Bird City, Wisconsin. It isn't a big obligation. Jim Canales has done it for the last several years. He's updated it all, digitized it all. And we have the mayor and the city parks department available to help complete that application. So if anyone is interested, you don't have to speak up now, but please, you can email me, find our website, or anyone else, and let me know. It's a pretty easy process. Like we said, we are looking for someone to fill the secretary position. We also have a chair position. We need an education chairperson to join us next year. So think about that, give it some consideration. If you interest you at all, please, again, let us know, and we'll fill you in on what all it entails. Tonight, we have Emily Filiberte. She came to us this evening from the Camp Research Station near Rhinelander. And she came with Andrew, who is her technician. And she said, basically, Andrew helps her catch the birds. She's a graduate student at the University of Maine, and her research is focused on understanding the annual survival of the golden-winged warbler. Come on in, Carol. And across their breeding range. It's a large-scale collaborative effort spearheaded and organized by the Roth Lab and the Golden-Winged Warbler Working Group. Fieldwork consists of trekking out to Tennessee, Kentucky, and Wisconsin and attaching year-long VHF-coded nanotags to the male and female golden-winged warblers with the intention of collecting enough return data to analyze their annual survival. As a child, Emily was originally from the Northwoods of Vermont, where her childhood consisted of getting deeply lost in the backwoods with binoculars in one hand and the Sibley Field Guide in the other. And so her passion for avian ecology intensified during her undergraduate study and participating as a technician on various wildlife projects. Emily's hobbies include long runs and puzzles. Let's give a warm welcome to Emily. I personally have been looking forward to this for months, so.
All right, well, thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks to Aldo Leopold Society for having me. As Karen mentioned, I am a master's student at the University of Maine, so quite a bit a ways from here. But I'm doing field work here in Wisconsin, and this is my third and final summer trekking out here and tagging these golden-winged warblers. So specifically for my research, as Karen mentioned, I am attaching these VHF coded tags to the warblers to try and estimate their annual survival.
Can we get some lights?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
That would help you a lot.
Yeah.
Better. Can I ask a dumb question, Rhonda? What's a VHF coded tag?
I will get
Oh, you'll
into
tell
that.
us.
Yes, I know it's confusing. But before I get into my research, I just wanted to kind of give myself some background and let you guys know kind of how I got to this point. As Karen mentioned, I loved birds throughout my childhood. My mom was a pretty avid birder, so I was introduced at a pretty early age. And then in undergrad, in 2013, I did my first work with the birds. I traveled out to grassland fields in Vermont, and I helped a master's student who was looking at bobolinks, which is a pretty charismatic grassland species. She was looking at their fledgling and nestling behavior. So I went out with her and I helped her do a lot of the field work that she was doing. ended up completely falling in love with it and did it for 2 more years in 2015 and 2016. And then after undergrad, I knew that I wanted to pursue bird research as a career because I was just totally in love with it after the bobolinks. So after graduation, I ended up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for a couple months where I was doing point counts, so bird surveys, which just basically consisted of waking up every morning, hiking a mountain, and then doing surveys along the way up the route. And then in 2018, I took my journeys to White House, Jamaica, where I worked with American redstarts, and that was for 4 months. We were just following around redstarts and looking at their overwintering behavior. And then I couldn't get enough of the tropics. So in 2019, I found myself in Panama for another 4 months, working with lance-tailed manakins. And I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with manakins, but they are one of the species that do courtship displays. So the alpha male and the beta male will dance on a perch to try and woo a female for the alpha male. So that job was just watching that process for hours and completely falling in love with those birds. But then eventually, I did want to stop moving so much and settle down. And I also wanted to kind of take the next step in my career. I wanted to offer more to bird research than I was doing as a technician. So I started looking around for graduate positions, and I found a position that my advisor, Amber Roth, was offering. She was looking for someone to work with the golden wing warblers, specifically try to figure out their annual survival. And I knew that I wanted to stay preferably in New England, and I also wanted to work with warblers. So I instantly reached out to her, met with her. She ended up offering me the position. And then the rest was history. I moved to Maine in 2021, and that's when I first started this project. So a little bit about golden wings. I'm sure many of us are familiar with golden wings in this room, but they are a migratory species. So they're a neo-Arctic, neotropical species, meaning they breed in the Northeast and also in the Midwest. And then they migrate down to both South America and Central America for the winter. And what's interesting about this species is that they have 2 completely separate regions. As you can see here on the right, they have one population that breeds in the Appalachian Mountains, and then they have another population that breeds in the Great Lakes. And these 2 populations are considered completely separate or allopatric. There's no overlap between these 2 populations at this point. And you'll also notice that golden wings don't actually breed in Maine. And so that is why I come to Wisconsin every summer for my field research. My advisor, Amber, she did her PhD work near Rhinelander. And so I'm traveling to the same sites that she used to go to continue research with that population of golden wings. And I get to stay at Kemp Natural Resources Station in the process. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that place, but it's truly a gem and definitely an added bonus to doing field work here in Wisconsin. So here is the golden wing, just a little bit about their ecology. In the top left, we have our golden wing male. They have the distinct black throat and then the black mask as well. And then the females in the lower left have the same patches, but just a grayer, not as dark face pattern. But both males and females have that pretty indicative white facial stripe. They have golden crowns, and then of course they have their golden wings. And these birds breed exclusively in early successional habitat. So that's habitat that has been disturbed in some way, either through human-related or natural causes, and then caused to regrowth as a result. So habitats that are very young, typically consisting of aspen or birches, they will exclusively breed in these habitats. So you'll find those in regenerating clear cuts or maybe in tamarack bogs, Again, any place that has been disturbed and has allowed regrowth to occur. We'll see if this plays. This is their song, which is pretty diagnostic. A very bee buzz buzz song. There it is. And they also nest right on the ground. Typically lay between 3 to 6 eggs, and they'll only have one nesting attempt per season. And what's also interesting is the males, at least, are extremely site fidelic, which means every single breeding season, they'll return to the same site to breed in the same location. But we're here talking about golden wings today, and I'm at the university studying golden wings because unfortunately they're faced with pretty precipitous population decline. And as we're familiar with, this is widespread across the avian community. Just looking at this graphic from Science in 2019, you can see that golden wings are kind of this poster child for the 17% decline in eastern forested birds. Looking at their breeding bird survey population trend, we can see from 1960 until present day, we've lost about 70% of our golden wing population. And then again, we have these two completely separate regions, but what's interesting is that they're facing different rates of decline. So in the Appalachians, they're declining by 6.3% per year, which is pretty stark. And in the Great Lakes, they're more stabilized, but also declining by about 0.7% each year. And because of all of this, they have some protections. They're listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List. They're listed as threatened on the Canadian Species at Risk Act, and then also a species of greatest conservation need in a lot of the state wildlife action plans in the states that they breed in. So we're not entirely sure what the primary driver of their population decline is. But again, we have lost 70% in the past half century, and we do have some ideas of what might be going on with their population. One of those is hybridization with the blue-winged warbler. So the golden wing in the top left and the blue wing in the top right are both in the genus Vermivora, and they're actually extremely genetically similar. I think it's around 99.5% genetically similar. But unfortunately, the blue wing, which are habitat generalists, so a species that can breed not exclusively in early successional habitat and just have more ability to breed in other locations, are due to climate change, increasing their breeding in higher elevations where the golden wings are breeding. And the golden wings are unable to outcompete the blue wings. So one of two things are happening. Either the golden wings are completely pushed out of their breeding areas and then they just don't breed that season, or they're forced to breed with the blue-winged warbler. And when that happens, two hybrid species are produced as a result. We have the Brewster's warbler in the bottom left, and then the Lawrence's warbler in the bottom right. And what's really fascinating about these hybrid species is that they're fertile, so they're able to reproduce. So while Vermivora as a genus is able to persist through this hybridization, we're definitely losing out on our pure golden wing warbler species because of this. Another threat is collisions, which a lot of us are familiar with as well. For some reason, golden wings are in the top 5 species relative to their population size that run into towers. I'm not really sure the science behind that, but they definitely are facing a lot of tower collisions. And then finally, habitat loss. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Historically, when logging was heavily prevalent, they obviously had a lot of early successional habitat. But 3 things are kind of limiting the amount of habitat that they have available now. The first is just overall conversion to agriculture or human development. So places where they historically bred are now being converted into fields or just into human development in general. Another thing is suppression of natural disturbances. So historically, wildfires would obviously disturb a habitat. And then after that, new growth would come as a result. Same thing with beavers who take out all of the trees in a certain area. So a lot of golden wings found habitat as a result of those two natural disturbances. However, we're pretty good at mitigating wildfires now, and we're also pretty good at beaver control. So when we're interfering with that natural process, we're taking away habitat from golden wings and other early successional species in the process. And then finally, we just have an overall maturation of forest types. So forests that were historically managed for early successional habitat are just now being left alone and are growing to a point where golden wings can no longer breed in them. And this is pretty common in the Appalachians, where a lot of their habitat was formed through mountaintop removal. So removing entire mountaintops to collect coal. And then after that process, the habitat was prolific for golden wings for a couple of years, but then just never touched again and then matured into old growth. So because of all of these things, we recognize that they're pretty vulnerable, and we're working hard to see if it warrants protection by listing them on the Endangered Species Act. But before we can do that, before they can become federally endangered, we have to take into account a lot of different things. So their biology, their ecology, their abundance, their population trends, and also their threats. And because their population is declining so quickly, we've really corralled together as researchers and tried to figure out all of these things as quickly as possible so that we can make a listing decision. But one thing we're currently lacking is a complete understanding of their population trends. So things like annual survival or immigration rates or mortality. And this is just a basic graphic showing population trends. So we know that immigration and reproduction both increase the population size, whereas emigration and mortality decreases the population size. And what we're currently lacking in the golden wing group is a complete understanding of their mortality. More specifically, their annual survival. So how likely it is that an individual survives an entire breeding season, migration, wintering season, another migration, and then returns back to the same breeding area and remains in the population for an entire year. And one thing we also are missing with annual survival is how that might vary between different age classes, how it might vary between regions, and then also most importantly, how survival might differ between sex. So if males have a higher survival than females is something that we're not entirely sure of, but definitely need to know before we can have an understanding of their population decline. So we need to figure out female annual survival, but this remains a critical gap in our knowledge. As I mentioned, females nest right on or near the ground, and they're also just generally low foragers and dwellers. So because of this, they're rarely detected or seen in standard point counts. So in the breeding bird surveys, for example, or project specific surveys, they're just never seen or heard. Unlike males who are charismatic and perch up high and would love for you to know that they are around. So because of this, we just have little idea what their annual survival might be. And one way to figure out annual survival is through mark recapture studies. So these are studies where researchers go out and they mark birds either with color bands or with metal bands that have a unique number. And then those same researchers try and come out to the same sites in the following year to recite the individuals that they banned. So we have a lot of data on our male golden wings because as you can see in these pictures, they perch high, they show their legs, and they announce where they are. So it's fairly easy to read their color bands and know who has returned. Whereas females, they're either really low, they're really quiet, or they're just covered in vegetation or sitting on nests. So not only is it hard to find them in general, but from these pictures alone, you can see it would be extremely hard to read their color bands and know who's come back. So typically when this happens, when you can't visually detect a bird, researchers turn towards telemetry. So these are just tags that researchers put on birds as a way of detecting them without actually having to see them. And these come in many different forms. This bobolink is wearing a geolocator tag. So these are tags that read light level information. And from that light level information, we're able to pinpoint relative location of an individual at the time. This woodcock in the top is wearing a satellite tag. So those tags are able to be read through the satellites that are orbiting around us. And the information on their location is uploaded straight onto the internet almost in real time. And then we also have VHF coded nano tags. So for example, in these two bottom pictures, and those tags are actively pinging information that can be picked up by stations or receivers that are programmed to pick up those frequencies. So these are all really great ways to see where an individual might be. And in a perfect world, it would be awesome to deploy it on a golden wing. However, golden wings only weigh about 8 grams. So we definitely couldn't be deploying any of these tags on those individuals. Researchers aren't even allowed to deploy tags unless it's less than 5% of a bird's body weight. So we've been stuck for quite a while in not really knowing what female survival might actually be. However, there's been a really exciting shift in technology. And I'm going to pause here to take some water. Leave the suspense. So Low Tech is a company that manufactures nano tags. And they programmed one recently, or they developed one that actively is pinging information, and it only weighs 0.43 grams. So less than 5% of the golden wing body weight. And they last over a year. So they're actively pinging information for over a year, which means if we deploy them on warblers, we can come back the next year and those tags will still be pinging information, and we'll be able to walk around with telemetry and see exactly who's come back. The trade-off with these tags is because they're so small and the battery has to be so small, they're only sending out signals every 30 seconds. And they're also completely dormant for 12 hours a day and actively pinging the other 12 hours. However, if we deploy these on our female golden wings, we might have a chance at seeing who's come back and understanding annual survival. So this is just an example of how they wear the tag. We have the transmitter that sits on their back, and then an antenna that's actively pinging that information. And the way that they wear it is almost like a backpack. So we attach a leg loop harness to the transmitter, and then one loop goes over one of their legs. And then we finagle it so that the other loop goes over the other leg, and the tag just sits squarely on the back like so. And then we have our towers or any type of antenna that's able to read the information that the tag is outputting, and we can figure out exactly what individual was being pinged and also where that individual was, depending on where the receiver was. So this is the basis of my project and what I've been doing for 3 summers. We've been putting tags out on female golden wings because this is who we're trying to understand. We've also been putting tags out on males as well, just to see if there is that difference in survival between the males and the females. And then we have a population of just control males. So males that we're not putting tags out on, we're just color banding them. And that's to see if there might be a negative effect that the tag is producing on survival of golden wings. And so to do this, we're setting up mist nets, and then we're taking measurements of the golden wings, and then attaching the nano tags. And I put together a video that kind of explains what we're doing. So this is really loud, but this is the habitat that we're doing our field work in. You'll notice a lot of sunshine, a lot of small growth. Once we find a bird, we find a location to put up the mist net. And then we'll put the mist net up and put speakers by the net that will play the conspecific or the golden wing call. Once the golden wings hear that call, they dive bomb the net, fall safely into pockets, and then we're able to extract them. Once we do that, we immediately take the nets down just so that we're not catching any other bycatch that we're not necessarily interested in. And then we'll assess the bird and make sure it looks okay, and we can proceed with measurements. If they're bitey, if they're fidgeting, we know that they're okay. So this is us attaching a metal band that has the specific social security number. And then we're also putting on color bands so that we can resight them with binoculars and see exactly who it is that we're looking at. After we do that, we weigh the bird. We have to make sure that the bird is actually heavy enough to receive the nano tags. If they're too light, we'll just color band them and send them on their way. But if they're heavy enough, they can get a nano tag. So this is the process. We just put them into a tube, restrict their wings, and get an accurate measurement that way. This one was heavy enough to get a nano tag. Then we age it by looking at their wing. And then we also collect a tail feather for future genoscaping, which is a small little fragment, but this is me recording the information for that tail feather for future analysis. So then we take the wing cord and also the tarsus length just to get an idea of how big they are. And then we make sure that they're still okay. And if they are, we'll go ahead and put the nano tag on. So this is me putting it over one leg and then finagling it over the other so that the tag lays safely and securely on its back, like a little backpack. And then the antenna hangs off down the tail. And then we just push the feathers underneath the tag just to minimize the tag to skin contact. But this is the final version. So this is the tag on its back, and then you can see the antenna protruding off of its tail.
Doesn't that get tangled into stuff?
No. We don't have any evidence of that happening. And we ended up trimming the antenna so that it would lessen the exposure from the tip of the tail to the bottom of the antenna. So once the bird is wearing the tag, they'll come back the next year, or we will come back the next year. Hopefully the bird will too. And then we can detect them in one of three ways. So the first way is walking around our field sites with telemetry and with our antennas, trying to see if we can pick up anyone that way. And then we were also able to get up into the air last year. We attached antennas to a fixed wing aircraft. We attached them right to the struts, and then we flew around the field sites to try and see if we could increase detection probability that way. The second way is through the MODIS network, which I'll explain a little bit later, but this is basically just an array of towers that are able to detect the tags that the golden wing is wearing. And then finally, just visual resight. And this is particularly useful for the control males that aren't wearing tags and we can't detect with telemetry. So this is just an example of some collaborators walking around with the receiver. This bottom picture is what that receiver looks like. And then a picture of our flight last year with the antennas attached to the strut, flying over our field sites. So this MODIS network that I'm talking about, this is a huge network of towers throughout now North and South America. And we decided to put up 2 towers in Rhinelander right next to our field sites so that hopefully those towers would be able to pick up our golden wings. So this is us constructing those towers. We put one, attached one to a greenhouse and then another one to a utility pole. And then this is just a map showing all of the towers that exist. So each yellow dot is a tower, and all of these yellow dots are able to potentially pick up our golden wings. And just zooming in on Wisconsin, those 2 little dots near Rhinelander are our stations that we put up in 2021. And then this is just an example of walking around the fields with the telemetry, using it to scan the environment. And then also just nice footage of our flight. We ended up partnering with Lighthawk, which is a conservation agency that volunteers their time to fly researchers or conservationists that are looking to do flights for a specific conservation related purpose. So that was really fun to do. Obviously, a bonus is that we got to fly over the North Woods of Wisconsin, and it was just beautiful. And we're actually going to be doing that again next week. The same pilot fell in love with the golden wings, because how could you not? And he offered to come and help us again this year. So this is just our deployments from 2021, which was my first season. You can see my star up here in Wisconsin. That was me deploying nanotags, mostly on county and state land, which you can see on the right. But I also had 2 other collaborators who deployed tags in Pennsylvania and then in Tennessee as well. And they were just helping to deploy nanotags for the purpose of my project, so that we could see how survival differed between the Great Lakes and the Appalachians. So altogether, we were able to deploy 82 nanotags, which was awesome. We didn't even know if 2 were possible. And we had pretty good deployment rates, at least in Wisconsin. We ended up tagging 20 females and 15 males, which met our goal. However, in the Appalachians, we weren't able to meet our goal for females. And this is just because birds, golden wings, are much more uncommon in the Appalachians. So my collaborators just couldn't find enough females to actually put tags on. So in an effort to get more tags out on females, in 2022, so the next year, we brought on a slew of other collaborators. Each star represents a collaborator that deployed nanotags in their specific region. And you can see we've covered a lot of the Great Lakes and a lot of the Appalachians as well with this nanotagging effort. And we definitely increased our female deployments. We ended up deploying 44 on females in the Great Lakes, and then a nice 30 on females in the Appalachians. And so right now, all of the collaborators that deployed tags last year are in the same exact study sites this year, at this, maybe not at this moment, but tomorrow morning, to try and find the birds that they deployed tags on last year. And so these are just some return rates that we did find. The tags ended up working. We were able to detect them, and the tags lasted well over 400 days. So we never really had an issue with a bird returning with a dead tag. We ended up finding 34% of our control males, so males that only had the color bands, and then 33% of our tagged males. And so with this information, we suspect that there is no adverse tag effect, just because we had the same rate of return for both control males and the tagged males. But as you can see, we didn't have a great return rate for our females. In Wisconsin, we only had 2 out of 20 of our females return. And one of the females actually had lost her tag at one point. She slipped out of it. And we only opportunistically found her by resighting her. And then in the Appalachians, where they deployed 13 tags, none of those females returned, or they could not find any of those females. However, things are looking up a bit. So this is our 2022 cohort. So Andrew and I have been looking for these birds that we deployed last year, the past 2 weeks. And I only have return information for Wisconsin because I haven't communicated with collaborators yet on what they actually found. But so far, we found 30% of our control males have returned. And we've also found 25% of our tagged males. And these are all of the males that have returned so far. We end up naming them just because they are our friends at the end of the season. Switchback was a really special bird. He pinged a MODIS station in Houston, Texas a couple weeks ago. And so we knew he was on his way and we got really excited to go find him. And he was actually the first tagged male that we did find. And he was on the same exact site in the same exact location where we deployed his tag. So we went out and we recaptured him right away and we snipped his tag off and released him back into the population. And then we also had Mars, Guster, Arnie, and Len return as well. And then for females, we've had 3 of them return so far. We have Kat, Megan, and Ms. White. And this represents a 12% return rate so far. So it's already higher than the return rate that we found last year. And it's still very much early days. Andrew and I are going to be looking until mid-June. And I suspect that more are going to keep coming in. And there's also just more searching to do in general. And we're hopeful that the aerial survey that we do next week will help us to detect more of the birds. And then just some cool MODIS detections as well. So this is a male named Bounce City. He kept bouncing in and out of the net. He just didn't want to get tangled, which who can blame him? But we did end up catching him and we deployed a nanotag on him on April 27th of 2021. And then he ended up pinging a MODIS station in Colombia on October 1st of 2021. So obviously we know that birds migrate, but it was just really cool to see proof that they actually migrate, and they migrate exactly where we expect them to migrate. But what's even cooler about Bounce City is he ended up returning and pinging the station near the Tennessee field sites exactly a year later on April 27th, 2022. So he had completed his migratory journey and let us know that he was back. And then this is just a map of our 2022 fall migratory detections. So all of the birds that we deployed tags on last season, this is a map showing the stations that they pinged on their migratory journey down to the wintering grounds. So we have our Appalachian population in red, and then our Great Lakes in blue. And then the dotted lines represent females and the solid lines represent males. So what's interesting about this is that the Appalachian population tended to ping stations in South America or Southern Central America, whereas our Great Lakes population ping stations in Northern Central America. And this, through other research projects, is what we already knew. We knew that these two populations overwintered in different wintering season or wintering locations. But again, it was just kind of cool to see proof of that. And then one really cool detection, we deployed another nanotag on a bird in Tennessee, and he ended up pinging the only active MODIS station in Venezuela at the time. So just incredible that he happened to fly by that one station and let us know that he was in Venezuela. And that's where he was choosing to overwinter. So just very cool information that we can find through birds wearing these nanotags, other than just using it to figure out their annual survival. We can see exactly where they're going and the movements they're choosing to make along the migratory journey. And so by the end of this, I'm going to collect a lot of information on a lot of different birds. I'm going to be ultimately looking at how survival differs between the Appalachians and the Great Lakes. I'm also going to be looking at how survival differs between males and females. And then also different ages. So between second year individuals, which are birds that were hatched in the previous year and then are now in their second year of life. And then after second year birds as well. And that's anything older than second years. So how survival might differ between those young birds and then the adult birds that are presumably more experienced and have a better job at surviving than the younger birds. And then finally, just how survival differs across years. And then all of that information I will use to help to improve our understanding of their population decline. And hopefully that information will lead to informing a good decision for either listing or precluding from listing on the Endangered Species Act. And if we are able to list them, then it just untaps a whole bunch of protections for the bird and also additional funding to keep researching them and keeping them around. And then finally, we're able to assess the efficacy of the nanotags so that other researchers who are studying perhaps other warblers in peril might be able to use this method to try and get more information on their species. And then I just wanted to end on a full circle note. So I mentioned before grad school, I did an internship in Jamaica where we were working with American redstarts. And this was through the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian just has a slew of researchers that have been doing this work with redstarts in Jamaica for decades. And my boss at the time when I was there is actually still doing work out in Jamaica. And last year he deployed nanotags, the same nanotags that we were using on American redstarts to try and understand their migratory journey. So he was deploying tags on birds, the same population of birds that I worked with 5 years prior. And he deployed one on this female American redstart in the top right. And through her tag, we were able to track where she was going. So we saw that she went up through Florida, and then she pinged a station in Illinois, and then she kept going further north and pinged a station in eastern Wisconsin. And then she ended up pinging my station that I had put up 1 year prior at our field sites in Rhinelander. So that was really cool. We were like, wow, this bird that I know so much about because I used to work with this population pinged one of my stations. And so I left it at that. And then a couple of days later, I checked the MODIS network again, and I saw that she was still pinging the station. So I was like, okay, this bird did not migrate past my station. I think she's sticking around. And so the next day when it was still pinging the station, I ended up going out with my technician at the time, and we had an antenna that we put out the car window, and we were just driving the streets trying to figure out if we could ping this bird. We ended up detecting her on private land. And so I looked up the information for the property owner, reached out to the property owner. They were totally psyched, gave me permission to go find her. And I ended up through her tag, tracking her right to her nest in the bottom right picture. So just a really incredible story. It's very rare that we know exactly where a bird overwintered and bred. And then just was so touching because I had such great connections with the Jamaican population. And then here I was in Wisconsin, continuing my efforts to tag and study birds. And she followed me there. But with that, I would just like to acknowledge all of my collaborators who are out in the field right now trying to find those birds. My advisor, Amber Roth, my lab mate and really good friend, Kurt Ogman, who's in New York deploying or finding deployed individuals. And then all of my technicians and volunteers who have come out with me to try and find these elusive birds. And then all of my funding. So my project is largely funded through US Fish and Wildlife, but also through various other funds as well. And with that, I can take any questions.
I noticed that some of your dotted lines ended up just very short little trips. So did they die, those birds? What
No,
happened?
so that's a good question. There are so many towers that are able to pick up the birds, but because they're only emitting frequency every 30 seconds, it's really rare for a tower to pick up our golden wings. In order for MODIS to validate that it's a true detection, it has to get 3 hits in a row, which would mean that the bird would need to be in the vicinity for a minute and a half, which is just pretty rare for it to happen. So all of these detections that we did get were incredible that we got them in general. But likely, no, they did not die. They're just evading the towers on their journey. Yeah.
So if it gets on the Endangered Species Act, I understand getting more funding, but what kind of protections could be had because of that?
That's a great question. I think we would just be able to protect their habitat better. So maybe stop some developments from happening in regions where we know that they are really prolific. And then just mostly through that funding, we're able to do more research in general and just to be able to get a better understanding of their decline. Yeah.
When you get a return, the transmitter is a year old, do you put a different one on, or do you just take it off and let that bird go? I mean, I had the impression you just didn't put another transmitter on it. Can you
Yeah.
explain that?
Yeah, so our birds that returned, our 2021 birds that returned, we did try to catch them all to take the tags off, and then we did not put more tags on. Our 2022 cohort was completely different birds that we deployed tags on. And these tags, the harnesses are just made of jewelry cord and glue. So eventually they will erode and fall off. But we're just trying to speed up that process by taking them off ourselves.
Why don't you re-tag them?
Basically, we just didn't feel like we had to because there are so many golden wings in Rhinelander. And we kind of saw it as you wore this tag for a year, you gave us the data, we can release you back. Yeah.
Are you saying that you're seeing a number of them then in the Rhinelander area?
We see quite a few. A lot of the state and county land is heavily logged. And so there's a lot of early successional habitat available. And I would say that they're one of the more common warblers that we come across in that habitat. But obviously I'm spoiled here in Wisconsin. They're much harder to see in other areas where there's less habitat available. Yeah.
I would assume that the interest in deploying those nano tags would be really high on all little tiny birds. I mean, the red starts and whatever. Have you seen that starting to happen?
Yeah, so these tags, I think they came out right before my field study. So maybe in 2020. And a lot of researchers are using them, but not necessarily to look at annual survival. They're mostly deploying nanotags to look at where they're going. So locational studies. I think it was definitely a big risk. We had a lot of faith that the tags would actually last 400 days, or at least long enough to detect them again. And I think that's a lot of what researchers were holding out on, was having someone else do it first to see if the tag would last that long. And they did, which was awesome. Yeah.
It said that these birds tend to come back to the same nesting area the next year. Will you find that bird the last one you had in the nest? Will they come back there?
So I don't know about female red starts, how fidelic they are. But unfortunately, she wouldn't be tagged anymore. So it would be extremely hard to try and
Is that
find her.
common for warblers to come back to the same nest?
Yeah, at least for males.
For males.
Yeah, like the bobolinks that I worked with in Vermont, same site every single year, the females as well. Yeah.
it seems like kind of an unexpected thing if this bird winds up on the endangered species list. Very often, if something's on the endangered species list, it's a good tool and argument for pristine areas, leave it alone and so on. But if these succeed better in the area that's logged, it's really kind of reinforcing the opposite type
I know.
of management.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that's very similar to the grassland dilemma. So we're seeing such widespread decline in our grassland species because we're not maintaining that grassland habitat anymore, but us maintaining it is us not letting it be natural. But because of the processes that we've developed, in the past, we've allowed these birds to come here. And so now we're seeing it as a right for these birds to persist. But that is a very interesting conversation specifically in the research and conservation realm. Yeah.
There was a question online about, do you work with low tech to determine the efficiency of the tags? If you know what LO capital T, okay?
Yeah, so we've been communicating with low tech pretty well because they're also interested in seeing how successful this process is. And so we've been letting them know how long these tags actually have been lasting, and also how well we've been able to retain the tags, or also how well the birds are able to retain the tags. So all of this information we're sharing with low tech. So hopefully low tech will also tell other researchers about our project as well.
Can you explain what low tech is? I wasn't familiar with
Yeah.
them.
Low tech is just a company that produces nano tags, and I think also satellite tags as well. So just a company that produces tags specifically for avian research, but also for fish as well. They make a lot of tags that researchers put into fish to track them. And then also butterflies. They've made a tag that is light enough to deploy on a butterfly, but it only lasts for like 20 days and then it dies because it's so small. But still very cool what technology is evolving to do.
Do they donate that, or is that part of the funding?
It's part of our funding. Yeah, they don't
How
donate.
much do they charge for these tags? They must be expensive.
One of our nano tags was $200 each, so pretty expensive. Yeah.
Is it of interest to know if one has been cited on its, like in central Wisconsin?
Yes, I mean, we won't be using that information for my survival analysis because we can't prove that that bird actually did return to the location where I tagged it. But it is cool to see that information, and I'm sure someone in the future will use that.
Well, because I'm a fairly new birder. I'm a friend of Susan's. So when I see new birds, I'm like, ooh. And I saw a male on my deck 2 times on the first weekend of May. And I know it's like, no one else has to believe me, but.
She really tried to get a picture. I'm like, you gotta get a
I
picture.
know, but it was sitting a couple times, like 2 days apart on my deck. And it's just, bopping around with other birds, and it's like, it's right there. Like, how could I not like notice it and all the features? And I looked it up and I text Susan like, I didn't even know how special it was. I think, looking it up, it's got, yellow and all that. And so anyway, I was very excited, and she's like, you have to get a picture because no one will believe you. But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's special.
I mean, that I have to just say, because it's so distinct, it was just feet away from me in the daytime. And I will say, I'm maybe 40% sure I may have seen this female. But that one I'm gonna like kind of go a little lower on because I get a lot of birds on my deck in my feeding area. But the male is just like, it's so distinct.
Yeah,
And so that's why I saw them 2 days apart, a male, whatever. I just wanted to share that.
yeah, that's really special. It was using your deck as a stopover location. Very exciting.
What do they feed on? What's their insects? Is that-
Mostly insects, yeah. So you'll see them foraging in the leaves, going underneath the leaf, finding their little insects, and then gobbling those up.
So a couple years ago, we saw Brewster's Warbler and you were talking about that connection. What's the distinguishing features then? When you're looking at the golden versus that Brewster's Warbler?
Yeah, so the golden wing has that distinct black patch, and for the Brewsters, it's just completely white. So they'll still have the black mask, but the throat is the telling characteristic. And for Lawrence's, they look mostly like blue-winged warblers, which are mostly yellow with just a black mask. But the Lawrence's have the black mask and they're yellow, and then they have the black throat patch. So the Brewsters and the Lawrence's switch. Yeah.
Here's another question that was online. So does the hybrids tend to be in certain geographic areas over the other areas? Like, we do see them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's actually pretty rare to see hybrids in Wisconsin. And that's because we don't have a lot of blue-winged warblers. So anytime we see a Brewster's or a Lawrence's or even a blue-winged, we get really excited. But my lab mate who's working in northern New York has a slew of blue wings and a slew of golden wings. And so he has just all sorts of vermivora flying around him. So all different shades of Brewsters and Lawrence's, and then blue wing and golden wings as well. And then in the Appalachians, blue wings are more common than they are here as well. And so the hybrids will be found more so in the Appalachians. So again, I'm really spoiled with this population of birds because they're as pure of golden wings as we can really get throughout their range.
Where are you located with that upper Wisconsin?
It's near Rhinelander. I don't know what specific towns, Harshaw, Woodboro, in that area. Yeah.
Jump station.
You used a technical term, meaning regrowth of forests, I think. What was the word you used?
I don't know. Early pioneer species. Succession.
Say that again,
Succession.
succession?
Yeah, so as a forest regenerates, it goes through stages of succession, meaning it gets older. And so early successional is just those early stages of the succession process.
Does the forest management in northern Wisconsin, there's a lot of early successional because they grow a lot of aspen for pulp and then cut it in 30 years. And does that benefit the golden wings?
Yeah.
Sort of forest management, yeah?
Yes. And I've been told through rumors, I guess I can't validify it, but I've been told that they manage the habitat for early successional species. So they'll take that into consideration for their logging cycles. And they'll also, one thing they do is they'll leave really tall trees, like one tree in the middle of a clear cut. And that's because there are probably multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is golden wings, the males like to perch up high and sing down below to all of the females under them. And so it's pretty rare to find them in areas that don't have at least a couple tall trees, just because that's where they like to hang out. So yeah, they do a really good job of creating this habitat for golden wings. But at the expense of old growth forests, as we're aware of.
Anything else for Emily this evening? I am just stunned. It's a wonderful. Great information, great photos, great video, really.
It's a joy to work with these birds and also in Wisconsin and